A former advisor of Ronald Reagan has some choice words for George W. Bush. David Stockman, Reagan's budget director from 1981 to 1985, slammed Bush and his former boss in an op-ed in the New York Times on Sunday. Stockman argued in the piece that Reagan's view on the deficit, quote, created a template for the Republicans' utter abandonment of the balanced budget policies of Calvin Coolidge. He continued that the deficit policies allowed George W. Bush to dive into the deep end, bankrupting the nation through two misbegotten and unfinanced wars, a giant expansion of Medicare, and a tax-cutting spree for the wealthy that turned K Street lobbyists into the de facto office of national tax policy. Zach Carter, HuffPost senior political economy reporter, joins us now. Zach, you're a big Reagan guy. When you hear something like this, is it unusual, to have like a Reagan guy backing Bush, trashing Bush?
Yeah, as a big Reagan guy, yeah, I think David Stockman's been kind of beating this drum for about a decade, actually, though not quite as loudly as he did in this piece for the New York Times. He's I think the most consistent and the most honest person from the sort of we can't afford it, America is broke school of thought on monetary economics. I think there are some legitimate critiques of this framework in general, but if you accept the framework, there are certain things that cost money that the government has to spend, and that these things contribute to a large deficit. In particular, he's looking at war and at Medicare Part D, which is a program allowing paying for prescription drugs for senior citizens under Medicare. These are expensive things for a lot of different reasons. But they could be cheaper if you wanted to tweak them, but they would still be very large programs and they cost a lot of money. That's what drove the big expansion of the federal deficit over the last couple of years. That and then a huge financial crash, which has cost a lot of money to clean up. And it's really hard to pin those policies on Democrats because Democrats weren't in power when they were enacted. I think one thing that's really interesting about Stockman's worldview, though, is that he does not agree with Democrats on how best to get out of this type of mess.
Well, that's what's interesting, right? They share the critique of Bush. They share the critique of that he abandoned a certain type of policy position. But then when it comes time to dig out, Democrats are saying, well, we need to invest in certain areas. We need to create long-term development, and we still need some tax cuts. Right?
Yeah, and David Stockman is just sort of like a universal pessimist here. I mean, he does not share the Republican Party's current predilection for taking all of this out on the poor through the Paul Ryan budget, for instance. He's very aggressively critical of that in the piece, saying we should not be trying to fix the deficit by balancing the books on the backs of our neediest citizens. But he also just doesn't fundamentally believe in Keynesian economics. He doesn't think that when you get into a liquidity trap like this, when everybody stops spending money, that the way to fix it is to have the government spend more money. He thinks that just makes the problem worse in the long run. And so this is someone who he basically thinks that we're going to have this slow play out of fiscal Armageddon. That there's really no way to actually get out of this, which I don't think is a particularly plausible view, but I think he is right that the lack of action in Washington combined with very aggressive action from the Federal Reserve right now could be setting the stage for some sort of asset bubble in the future, which we would not be as prepared to deal with fiscally as the last one. But at the same time, I think someone like Paul Krugman is theoretically equipped to offer a just as plausible, if not more plausible.
I was going to say, and his vision is obviously one that says investment right now actually makes some sense. Spending right now makes some sense. One quick question before we move to the next thing. I'm Dropping Dimes writes in and says, when Stockman had influence, why didn't he do the right thing? There is this tendency in retrospect for policy advisors of someone, whether it's Dick Morris with the Clintons or whether it's Stockman with Reagan, they jump out and they say, you know what, it was a mess. When he had influence, it seemed to me that he didn't advocate the position he's taking now with regard to fiscal responsibility.
If you actually go back and look at the sort of base between the different Reagan advisors, Stockman represented this we can't afford it wing of the Republican Party, even in the early 80s. And there were other people within the Reagan administration, particularly in the Defense Department, who disagreed with him and ended up winning on most of the major budgetary issues.
Gotcha. So he was like a voice in the wilderness here. It wasn't like, okay.
Right, and he did resign, actually. He resigned in 1985, saying this was not the Reagan administration he signed up for. I mean, he was in for several years, but then he left. So I think it's unfair to say that he didn't walk the walk when he had the chance to. I think he's been very, very consistent actually throughout his career about this.
You hear that? I'm dropping dimes. You're wrong, Zach Carter says, and he's a Reagan expert. There we go. Anyway, we got more stuff to talk about, man. After Todd Akin lost the Missouri Senate race to Democrat Claire McCaskill in November, he had one last piece of business to take care of as an outgoing member of the House. You know what it was? giving piles of government money to his staff. Aiken nearly doubled the salaries of his House staffers in the quarter after his defeat, according to the website Legistorm, which tracks congressional pay. Zach, this is like the most clear case of just sour grapes government player hating I've ever seen in my life. He's like, you know what, I lost, or I'm taking everybody's money with me.
Well, I actually, because Aiken was on his way out, he was leaving Congress because he lost this election. His staffers all were out of a job, and I actually think this practice of outgoing members of Congress giving a big bonus to their staffers, it's kind of like providing severance when somebody gets laid off or something. I think from a labor perspective,
I think
it's
Zach
from a labor
didn't just say that.
I think from a labor
Zach
perspective,
Carter, you
it's
didn't just say that.
Totally reasonable. I think what's rough about this is that the
GOP
has been crying about government spending for several years now, and even doing a lot of symbolic things with congressional pay and congressional budgets.
So if a multinational corporation fails and the CEO gets fired and he gets his huge bonus, you're pissed off, right?
Depends on the CEO, certainly, but Aiken in this position would be the CEO, right? He's paying his staffers who are generally overworked and not paid. They make good money, but congressional staffers don't make anywhere near what they would make in any Wall Street bank, for instance, if they jump ship to the private sector.
Yeah, but it's our money.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And they're getting, but they're also right, and they're getting paid a bonus after the ship goes down, sort of. But I also don't think
a ship that they help sink.
Well, it depends.
I mean they're staffers of it. This is the legit rape guy, right?
Yes.
Just make sure I'm sure, right? Okay. This is the guy that talked about legitimate rape. They constructed a narrative around women's rights, around women's bodies, around fiscal responsibility, all of which was largely destructive to the American public, right? Then, after he loses, he's taking our money, which he said was being taken by Obama through his tax policies, and now he's taking more of our money and giving it to those people.
I have a problem with it from a hypocrisy standpoint. I think it's very easy to look at this and say, you guys have been crying about government spending all along, and here you are just paying your friends with government money. But I think from a general labor standards perspective, you don't want people who work for the federal government to have terrible pay situations. You don't want them to be always eyeing the exits because there's better money over in Wall Street or better money at GE or Boeing or wherever you could go to. You want them to be able to think, okay, well, if I stay here and do work that I at least think is good, I think there are perfectly good reasons to criticize, Todd Aiken's staff over the past few years. But you don't want these people to be constantly, jumping for the exits because
fair enough. But I tell you something, Zach. In all fairness, Zach, if you're working for a guy whose job is up on the line every 2 years, and he talked about some kinds of rape not being legit, you kind of have to be looking for the exit anyway. I mean, you kind of got to know this guy doesn't have a long career in politics. That's all I'm saying. But we got more stuff to talk about because there's something going on in India that you got to hear about. India's Supreme Court on Monday rejected drug maker Novartis AG's attempt to patent a new version of a cancer drug and a landmark decision that healthcare activists say ensures that poor patients around the world will continue to get access to cheap versions of life-saving medicines. Novartis had argued that it needed a new patent to protect its investment in the cancer drug Glyvac, while activists said that the company was simply trying to use loopholes to make more money out of a drug whose patent had expired. The decision has global implications since India's $26 billion generic drug industry supplies much of the cheap medicine used in the developing world. Zach, this is great news for most people, perhaps everybody except the big drug companies, no?
Yeah, it's basically, it means lower drug prices all over the world. So if you are in the business of selling drugs, that's not great for you. But for public health systems, for the federal government in the United States, for consumers all over the world, it's very good news because so much of the generic industry comes from India. And this makes very clear what I think people, the Indian government has been moving this direction for a very long time. The AIDS drugs, for instance, that made George W. Bush's very successful AIDS relief program possible, all came out of India at low-priced generics, which are biologically, chemically identical to the patented versions that are available from big name drug makers. There's no real public health issue there. It's just a question of competition and making sure that these things can be available at low prices. The cancer medication here, the patented version or the version they wanted to have a patent on was only being sold for about $2,700 a month in India. This is a country where the annual per capita income is about $1,400 a year. The generic version was $175 a month. So we're talking literally 1/20th the price of the patented version. That means that this version is not only available to people in India, but it means India can ship this around the world to countries, to countries in Africa, to countries in Europe, to the United States, and make this type of medication available. It's a very big decision.
But there's also the slippery slope argument that I was worried about, right? Which is that if this company was able to do what it wanted to do, then suddenly companies would slip and slide out of their generic drug agreements and basically force people to pay more for drugs, right? I mean, if they had won this battle, then what would have happened is people who are now paying, say, $5 for AIDS meds might be paying $100 for AIDS meds in 6 months. In long term, that would mean that poor people, particularly in the global South, wouldn't have access to drugs they need just to stay alive.
Yeah, you would see immediate upward pressure on drug prices for sure, and within a couple of years, you would probably, because these companies would then start bringing challenges to every generic that is being that is being manufactured in India, and you would see a lot of very serious cases of public health problem. I mean, we already have this within even the George W. Bush AIDS program, although it's been really successful. You can look at the reports from that program in countries like India or in Vietnam. Where they say, look, this program is doing great, but we actually have shortages of the generic drugs available, which make it very difficult for us to meet the need here because it's so expensive to treat with the big headline drugs. And this type of practice of evergreening is really common. It's something that you see happening all over the place, where a drug company has something that's a genuine innovation. And then they just tweak it a little bit. They say, okay, well, we'll give you a heat stabilized version, so it'll be better for the global South because you don't have to pay to refrigerate it, and get a new patent on that, and then stop making the original one available once the patent on the original.
Well, that's what I mean.
Expires.
That's exactly what happens, and they're pricing the poor people out of the market.
Yeah, and it's an intentional thing. I mean, it's a business strategy to maximize revenue from the drug rather than to create new innovations.
I got to tell you, man, there are days where I get profoundly frustrated. And even shocked at how heartless corporations can be. I mean, they're literally trying to find a way to make more money at the expense of people who won't get drugs they need to not get cancer, if we ever come up with a cancer drug, to not get AIDS if we ever come up with a cure for AIDS. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like long term, this will actually stop sick people from getting well. Like, that's just disgusting to me. We got to run, man, but it's always good to see your face, man. Actually, I have one more thing I need to talk to you about, okay? Because
all right.
I'm sorry, the drug companies ticked me off, and now I need to feel happy again. So can we talk about some happy stuff?
Sure.
All right. The Easter Bunny. How's that? Is that happy? Yes,
happy.
Okay. The Easter Bunny, dozens of professional athletes, and thousands of children set to hop across the White House lawn as President Obama and his family lead the annual Easter egg roll this morning. The theme of this year's event is Be Healthy, Be Active, Be You. It's fitting, of course, with First Lady Michelle Obama's campaign to lower childhood obesity rates by encouraging physical activity. Among the stars scheduled to be there are Minnesota Vikings running back Adrian Peterson, NASCAR driver Danica Patrick, John Orozco, and Washington Wizards point guard John Wall. Oscar-nominated actress Quvenzhané Wallis, she's the star of Beasts of the Southern Wild, was also set to attend. This is good news, Zach. First of all, why aren't you there?
I got to work today.
Because we'd love to see you rolling across the White House lawn. And I'm sure you got an invite.
No, actually, I was not on the list. At least, if I was, maybe it went to my spam folder. I've been sending all the direct mail from Barack Obama to that anyway. I don't know why.
That's probably good. Of John Wall, I'm a little scared that if he runs across that White House lawn, he might break another ankle or something, man. This guy gets injured every 3 weeks. Do we really want him hopping across the White House lawn?
The White House lawn is very safe. They spend a lot of money keeping it green and keeping it clean. So unless he slips on an egg or something, I think he'll be all right.
How long do you think it'll take before Fox News comes up with some critique of this ceremony? By noon, they'll have something.
I didn't catch Fox and Friends this morning. I wouldn't be surprised if they
already have something. Right? Exactly. Anyway, man, well, you're a big guy on Fox, so you'll keep us posted on what goes on over there, and it's good to see you, man. And if you can, make it to the White House lawn, man. I want to see you on camera hopping across with Michelle and Danica Patrick.
I'll just go knock on the door after this hit.
Just use your private key pass, man. All right, good to see you, Zach. Always fun.